Who was the absolute worst roommate you've ever had? Last year, I had 3 roommates. 2 of my guy friends and one of the guys' wife, who was a complete witch from the beginning till the end. She really never bothered me directly. She kept to herself in her room for the most part, but I couldn't stand the fact that she was married to my best friend. They've been together for 3 years now and have been married for a year. Throughout their relationship, she's done nothing but give him attitude for absolutely nothing. My best friend always comes back to the apartment and immediately gets summoned in their room and won't come out for about an hour. Do you know what happened during that hour? It's not intimacy. It's an hour-long witching time from her to him. She just comes up with excuses to make him feel like complete trash. Oh, and she hated my girlfriend because she knew my girlfriend was way better looking and more fun to be around with. And for some reason, she gave him an attitude for that too. One day he was caught viewing videos. She went absolutely crazy. She harmed him and threatened to get a divorce. I wish they had. Instead, they decided to stay together so she can remind him how he broke her heart and ruined the trust every day of his life. Now they have their own place. He's working 2 jobs and going to school full-time to get a master's degree while she sits watching another Twilight movie, which she makes him watch with her sometimes. She single-handedly ruined my best friend's life. I guess happily ever after isn't in the cards for every couple. Sounds like his friend's wife is more of a happily never after kind of person. Story 2. I had a roommate who did the following. When the 4 of us won a Decorate Your Door for Christmas prize, she demanded that the 3 of us hand her our cash prizes because her work had caused her apartment to win. She would never pay for groceries, then invite her friends over so that way she could cook enormous meals for them using the stuff that everyone else had purchased. She once drank an entire bottle in one sitting, retched all over the couch, and then left for a week's vacation the next day, leaving the furniture reeking of retching. She believed in some sort of backwards karma system where if she did something good for a stranger, that would allow her to take something from one of us. For example, if she helped an associate move a heavy piece of furniture, that meant that she could be able to get away with not buying any groceries for a full month because she learned it by helping her friend with moving furniture. She once agreed to give a mutual friend some of my extra clothing because she was headed to the building where that friend worked. She then gave that clothing to a stranger instead. She would borrow money and then never pay it back. She would turn the channel on the TV while other people were watching. I realized that all this seems very minor, but repeated minor annoyances tend to add up enormously, so that by the end of the year she could do something as minor as eat one of my bananas and I'd be all, "Get stuffed, witch," because of all that resentment. She had good sides to her personality too, but those parts were often overshadowed by examples of selfish short-sightedness. None of that seems minor to me. Story 3. 3 short stories about my worst roommate. We stayed in our college apartment over summer. He got himself a membership to Costco. He then proceeds to stock up on massive amounts of junk food, Hot Pockets, Pop-Tarts, various bulk candy, etc. He also bought 2 boxes of prepackaged muffins. He then comes home with all of this and tells me, "Hey man, if you're ever hungry, help yourself." Then he hides everything except the muffins. Being self-sufficient at the time, I declined. Later that summer, I decided to take him up on his offer. Out of the 2 dozens or so muffins, I think I must have had 3 to 4 over the course of as many days. A few days later, I awoke at 6 a.m. to him freaking out that I ate too many muffins. I pay him $10 to shut him up. 2 days later in the pantry, I found a Tupperware container full of muffins. This was no ordinary container though. I drilled the handholds on each side and put 2 master locks on it. Left it there for me to find. I called him Muffins to his face until the time I moved out. We had 2 girl roommates. He, being the socially adept fellow that he is, continually left videos playing on his computer. Whether I was there or not, whether he was there or not, whether our female roommates were there or not, and he didn't see what was so wrong about that. Finally, I had to sit him down and explain why that wasn't acceptable behavior, because we were living with girls and it was extremely creepy. He still would occasionally leave it playing loudly when he had to leave in a hurry to make it to a class on time. In our bathroom, the sink was located right when you walked in, then the toilet was next to it. And finally, the shower took up the whole far wall or end of the bathroom. I walked in around noon to find a half-eaten baguette sandwich in the sink next to the toilet. Obviously, he had felt the urge to snack while dropping a load. I leave it. The girls refuse to touch it. Muffin strolls back in around 5 to 6 and we tell him he left something in the bathroom. He walks in, exclaims, "There it is," and finishes the sandwich. I almost got physically ill. Story 4. I have had some bad roommates, but nothing compares to my friend's worst nightmare roomie. My friend had this really shifty roommate that was always in his room or not in the house. Real dirty, and he was starting to think that he had some mental problems. One day he came home and, figuring that his roommate was home, he called out his name. Kevin? Kevin? Hears no response directly. He hears some noise in the unfinished basement. He goes down into the basement where there's cement floor, washer and dryer, and very little to no natural light coming in. He goes down the stairs and tries to turn on the lights, but nothing happens. Moves over to the light in the center of the room. There's broken glass in the floor from a smashed light bulb in the fixture above him. All of a sudden, my friend's roommate came out of the dark corner of the room with a weapon and hurt him. My friend wrestles the weapon from the guy and makes it up the stairs and out of the house. This is before cell phones, so he has to go to the neighbor's house to call cops. Turns out the bad roomie was going schizophrenic and having a psychotic break. Story 5. So in second year university, I lived in an apartment in the 15th floor with 5 other dudes. One of them was Kevin. Kevin did all of your standard awful roommate things. For starters, he never washed a single dish. He piled dirty pans in the sink after cooking something horrid smelling from whatever in his fridge shelf wasn't rotten. He got tons of takeout with his excessively loud friends and left the garbage piled in the coffee table. And for all that, he was barely ever around somehow, so we couldn't hassle him. Although one time we did get on him enough to make him deal with 2 sinks worth of dirty dishes. One time when we were having a fairly large party at our place, Kevin looked at our kitchen garbage, which was close to overflowing. He yelled something about, "This is gross and it's gotta go now," and picked up the trash can, which had me thinking, wow, this is awfully responsible for him, especially while hammered. Then he started walking towards the balcony and I immediately knew what was up. However, while I was imagining he would shake the garbage from the can with a sort of side hand motion, instead he proceeds to throw the entire garbage can over the railing on the 15th floor. Luckily, he moved out halfway through the year, though he left bags of his stuff everywhere for a month or so. Oh, and remember those 2 sinks of dishes he dealt with earlier in the year? Well, ever since then, we had the sense that we had less dishes than we did previously. Although it must be obvious now in this retelling, at the time we didn't make the connection. Until we were cleaning a pile of recycling off the balcony and found a black garbage bag, full of the most horrid, gross dishes you've ever seen. Instead of doing the dishes, he had put 2 sinks of everyone's dishes, most of which he'd used in the first place, into a garbage bag and left them on the balcony for us to clean up 6 months later. Who needs a dishwasher when you have a balcony? Kevin's unique approach to cleaning was certainly unconventional. Story 6. Years ago, seems like a lifetime ago, I moved into a friend's place when my parents moved out of state. I was 19 with a job and paid them about $100 a month to sleep in a converted woodshed. Yep, woodshed. I shared it with a friend of mine in a similar situation. So 2 19-year-old guys living in a woodshed in the backyard of our friend's parents' place. We insulated the thing. It was heated, had TV with cable and a PlayStation. Yes, that long ago. It wasn't that bad, really. I'd been there almost a year, just stocking up cash so I could get a place and go to college. I would have to pay for that myself. If I remember right, after a year, my parents wouldn't be expected to pay, so I could get grants. Anyway, I got a call at work that my grandma's passing. I gotta leave from work and jet off to another state. When I get back, my buddy, the one I shared the shed with, is there and tells me they're pissed that I took off like that without saying anything, and I have to move. It would be best if I just left now and didn't talk to anyone because they were that upset with me. I called some friends who offered me a place before and they said, sure, come on over. Turns out Buddy's lying and he robbed the parents blind and blamed the whole thing on me. I found this out a few years later when I showed up to visit. They were shocked to see me and I explained everything. Turns out Buddy there went on a binge and got ended in a car accident a month or so after I moved out. They said they figured it wasn't me, plus dude came up with a lot of cash he spent afterward. Now that was a bad roommate, but just the prelude to the worst ones. The 2 guys I moved in with were users. No big deal. I knew as much beforehand. The house was owned to the older of the 2, inherited from his mother who had passed away when he was 17. I met the other one as a coworker at a job before, so that was how I was able to be there. I didn't know them all that well, though, but we got along great. Turns out there was a full-blown growing operation in the basement. They wanted me to live there because I worked in a commercial nursery and knew a lot about plants. I could live there rent-free and give them advice. I didn't deal with the operation and only saw it a few times. Well, I had spent most of my savings flying across the country and my job didn't hold my job for me. I was broke and had nowhere to go, so I said I'd do it. That was like a party every day for a few months. I didn't work and had no want for anything. They provided money for food and everything. Sadly, I flaked off college at this point. My one regret in life. Things were cool. They did get a bit wild at times. I somehow was dating a so our parties were the best I've ever been to. Things started getting strange though. I got super paranoid. Strange, scummy people started coming by, and the younger ones seemed to like to brag about their operation. Well, it turns out that they decided they'd try some substances. No surprise, they got hooked. Now, my cool party house was no longer. Suddenly, in a period of 2 weeks, it was an odd house. I still had no real money of my own, no job, and no way to move out. The scummy people were getting worse. One lady robbed a series of banks and came to our house to get her fix. In the car, she just robbed a bunch of banks, with the police searching for her on the news. Even they said, "Get the hell out." Then later that same day, I was taking a shower and one of them triggered a weapon off in the house. The tile in the shower shattered. It went through 2 walls and the projectile was lodged about 6 inches from my leg in the wall. Holy heck, I've got to move. I left to find a job and stayed at some chick's house that night. When I returned the next day, they told me all of the fun I'd missed the night before. Seems they were loose-lipped and the guys they were buying their substances from wanted their operation. About 12 guys kicked in front of the door in the middle of the night armed with weapons, hog-tied them all and maced them. Took everything from their grow room, about 120 plants ready to be harvested, 400 clones, lights, everything, 1 kg of substances, and $40,000 in cash. They broke the younger guy's legs because he kept struggling. I couldn't help but think they knew because of him anyway. The guy said he was done and sold the house. I've never seen either of them again. Story 7. One of my roommates, freshman year of college, was a really sheltered kid, and I could tell that he was going to have a hard time getting adjusted. Me, my other roommate, and the rest of our suite were really accommodating and tried to talk to him, but he was kind of weird and extremely shy. For a while, it seemed that he was a nice kid, albeit a bit awkward and strange. A few weeks into the quarter, while I was in the room, he would start asking me really weird questions. He once asked me if I thought vampires existed, to which I responded that they didn't. He said, "Are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure I saw one the other day." Then this other time, he was looking at a list of students in his discussion section, and one of them had the same name as someone in their suite. No big deal, right? Well, my roommate thought it was the funniest thing in the world. He actually brought the other dude over and pointed it out to him while laughing. "You guys have the same name." He kept on pointing at the screen and his face was turning red because of how hard he was laughing. At that point, me and my other suite mates realized it was definitely very strange. He also asked me once about mind reading and whether or not I could read his mind. I'm a pretty tolerant person, so I shrugged most of it off and I figured he was just a really weird kid. Fast forward towards the end of the quarter, about a week before finals, I come into my suite and I see him, his mom, and the dean of my college. Apparently, I found out that he's moving out and he's going to take his final exams next quarter. I didn't want to pry, so I refrained from asking any questions. I just said goodbye and wished him the best. He took most of his stuff, but a good portion of his things were still there, enough for me to think that he would eventually come back. A week later, after all of our finals are done, I walk into my room and all of his stuff is gone. Apparently, he moved out for good. I didn't really know what to think of it, and since it was the last day of finals, I was going home that afternoon for Christmas break. I kind of just shrugged it off, since we could all tell that he wasn't really adjusted to college life and he was just way too sheltered to fit in. On the way home, I got a call from him. He had this weird habit of asking my name in form of a question before he asked me anything, as if he had to make sure it was really me. James and Kevin are names of people in my suite. "David?" "Yeah?" "Can you tell James to stop reading my mind? I know he's doing it, so can you please just tell him to stop?" All right. "And can you tell Kevin to stop too? Not sure if he's doing it also, but just tell him to. All right? Bye." He ended up coming back a few quarters later. He looked really different because he had gained a bunch of weight, but we suspected that it might have to do with the medication he was put on. Whenever I saw him, I always said hi to him and asked him how he was doing. He's doing well now. I even had lunch with him and a few of my other suite mates. He's still sort of weird, but he's genuinely a nice guy, so I don't have any problems with him. But man, those few months were confusing as heck. Story 8. About 2 years ago, I used to live with 2 girls named Susan and Gio. Gio was dating Susan's brother, who was a gigantic schmuck, and Susan knew it. but Gio was hooked. He was mistreating towards Gio, and oftentimes it would wake up to them screaming at one another, and it would always end with Chris, the boyfriend or brother, hurting her, and Gio crying as he stormed away from our house. This never made much sense to me because Chris was a skinny little trash and Gio was a pretty big tough girl who could easily knock the heck out of him. One day I wake up to the two of them fighting over a jar of grass, which Gio had in her hand, and Chris decided to squeeze her hand until the jar broke, hurting her hand pretty badly. She dropped the jar, he shoved her over, called her awful names, and proceeded to pick up the largest chunk of the broken jar and threw it, hurting her face pretty badly as well. He left, and we comforted Gio, and both Susan and I told her that he was no longer allowed in our house, for everyone's safety. Gio flipped out about this and left as well. The next few weeks were hell. Chris continued to come over, insulting and threatening both Susan and I, and there were many times we all got into fights. Gio never did anything, but it always ended in one of us kicking Chris, and Gio would rush to his aid and talk all kinds of awful things to Susan and I, threatening us as well. They ate all our food when we were gone and left snarky notes to us about it, broke into my room several times and trashed it, and tried to steal my movies and video games. I say try because they would just take them and put them in a room. We only had a few weeks of the lease left, so I just put locks on everything and decided to stick it out. By the end of it, Gio had stopped paying her bills and owed Susan and I over $600 due to damages, bills, food, last month's rent, etc. When Susan and I moved out, we just took all of their movies and video games and called it even. Susan still had to deal with them at times, seeing as how they were related, and their mom told Susan that, after we had moved out together, Chris was asking her for a new address so as to destroy our tires, wreck our cars, and break into our house and do God knows what. Susan and I eventually had a falling out, and Gio and her have since made amends. I still can't stand any of them, and I'm so glad to finally have a normal roommate. Story 9. I had a roommate that loved bacon. Don't get me wrong, I, as most Redditors, love the succulent, delicious meat more than most, but this guy, he really loved it. He ate it for all 3 meals, and sometimes it would be the only thing he would eat all day. The way he cooked it was awful, though. He would simply put it in a bowl and microwave it. To eat it, he would get it out of the bowl, give it a good shake, and then stuff it down. The inside of the microwave was unusable, as all of the bacon grease turned into sludge. I tried telling him if he was going to be eating his way through an entire herd of pigs on a weekly basis, the least he could do was to clean it up. He made minimal effort, and the grease seemingly covered the entire kitchen. It was disgusting. At this point, I basically avoided the apartment anyway, as my social life managed to become robust. Living the intern life in DC, outside of the 8 hours of nightly sleep, it basically got to the point where I avoided the damn place because it was gross. Oh, that's not all. After work, I came home, changed, and then went out with my girlfriend at the time. We were having a nice night, when all of a sudden she takes a couple of whiffs and asks, "What's that smell?" Strangely, it smells like bacon. She was right. I smelled like bacon. That damn roommate of mine had stunk up the whole place with his excessive bacon obsession. The stench of the bacon made its way to my closet. My clothes smelled like bacon. It was disgusting, and next time I saw him and gave him a stern talking to, he scrubbed the hell out of the place and it was better. But I don't think I ever quit smelling like bacon until I moved out 2 months later. So yeah, that was the worst roommate I've ever had. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 10. This will probably disappear in the responses, but I want to get this story off my chest. Coworker friend and I decided to look for apartments together in early 2010. Another coworker found out and decided he wanted some too. So we looked for a house so they could have parties and whatnot. I'm a girl. My coworker is a girl. We'll call her Kelly. And the other one is a guy. We'll call him Ray. Me, Kelly, and Ray moved into a house that was cheap but not in the best of neighborhoods. Worked out great for Kelly because her favorite type of mail was in abundance. Dealers. She would drive down the street asking people if they had grass and invite them over to our house. I immediately installed a lock on my door. Turns out it became really hard for me to get my homework done there because she and Ray spent more time partying and getting stuff than anything else. Kelly starts dating one of the dealers and he brings his friends over. I didn't like them, so I asked her to tell them not to come back. Turns out her boyfriend is mistreating. Told her he wasn't welcome anymore and she just kept on bringing him back. St. Patrick's Day last year was a mutual friend's birthday and she came over for drinks with me, Kelly and Ray. Kelly had her boyfriend over and a few of his friends. Long story short, One of the friends mistreated me. The horrible part is Kelly begged me not to go to the police and told me it wasn't a big deal. That's happened to me a few times before. Don't involve the police, your boyfriend will go to jail. He's wanted for dealing. I did file a report, but the guy was never caught. On an unrelated note, her boyfriend got picked up trying to sell substances a few weeks later. I told my friends I wanted to move out immediately, to which Ray said I couldn't, and I had to pay the next month's rent. This is March 17th, remember, mid-month. I said, watch me. He changed the lock so I couldn't get into the house I was paying for, except his stupid self forgot to change the locks on the back door, so eventually I did get in. If I ever move out again, it will be by myself. I never want to have a roommate again. Story 11. Oh wow, where to begin? The first time I moved out, I lived in a house with my boyfriend and two other guys. One of the guys, Robert, was extremely odd. He was an actor and seemed to have no real source of income, save for the couple of weeks he was in Greater Tuna, a play that features two actors playing multiple characters in a small town. He would frequently wear one of their costumes around the house and on his way to and from rehearsals and performances, which would be fine, but he was at least 6'2" and dressed as a little old lady. Gray wig, pantyhose, hat, spectacles and all. He owned all the communal furniture and everything had to be spotless at all times. We were not allowed to leave any personal property outside our rooms. If we did, he would put them in our bed. This included dirty dishes. If one dish was left in the sink, it was worse than treason. He liked to complain and frequently yelled. A lot. He would turn on a dime. Most of the time he was pleasant and friendly, but if something angered him off, look out. When I moved in, he had two kittens, which he kept in his room. His room was always locked at all times. We would hear him screaming at the kittens and what sounded like him throwing things. At some point, the kittens disappeared. No idea what happened to them. He frequently would leave at odd times of night to meet up with friends. He never had any friends over. And after the play was done, we had our suspicions about where he was getting his money. He didn't own a car and rode his bike everywhere. So one night we decided to follow him. We wound up hiding behind a billboard across the street from the local bar. Robert had chained his bike to a bus stop and was sitting there at 1 a.m., singing show tunes to himself. Eventually, a car pulled up and he got in. We waited. About 10 minutes later, the car dropped him off again. He took a seat and resumed singing. Half hour later, another car. He gets in, rinse, repeat. This happened 5 times before we decided to go home. From then on, we referred to him as Bus Stop Bob amongst ourselves. At that point, all 3 of us just wanted to get away from this guy, so we started looking for a new place, not letting Bus Stop Bob know our plans. One morning, about a month before we all moved out, my boyfriend and I decided to take a shower together. There was a window in the bathroom, with a front porch on the other side. As I'm getting out of the shower, I see movement outside. I peer out and there's Bus Stop Bob, grinning with embarrassment and looking every which way, trying to pretend he hadn't been watching us. A few days later, my boyfriend and I were hanging out in the living room, something we never did. Usually we just stayed in our rooms. In comes Bob and he strikes up a conversation. I don't remember the course of the conversation, but it was getting progressively creepy and fast. He told us he thought we were both very attractive. Then bam, he asked for us together. We politely turned him down. Awkward. Not long after that, we moved out. He was infuriated. He demanded we pay him our share of the rent for the following month, even though we wouldn't be living there. He tried to threaten to sue us because we didn't give him 30 days' notice. He was subletting, probably legally. Plus, when me, my boyfriend, and the other roommate figured out how much he was getting from us, we figured out he was paying $200 a month for the master bedroom in a $1,000 house. We got the hell out of there the next day. Oh, and I should also mention that he had about 8 sad clown collector's plates decorating the otherwise sterile white living room. I hated those things. Who knew Bus Stop Bob was such a hit with the late-night carpool karaoke crowd? Story 12. I had a slew of worst roommates for about 6 months when I first moved to Tokyo. Since I was a foreigner without an apartment, I moved into a guest house. A guest house is between a hostel and an apartment. It's cheap. You have to share the space with others, sometimes only one other person, sometimes up to 10. You pay monthly, etc. The first place I stayed in was a pretty big room with 4 bunk beds and a bathroom down a long hallway. Only one of the other beds was taken. I thought I got lucky since the other room seemed almost full and this one was practically empty. Well, there's a reason for that. Since the world economy tanked, lots of Japanese crazies lost their jobs. When someone had to get fired, they would fire the crazy person first. So there were all these crazy Japanese people filling the guest houses to live almost permanently, instead of foreigners there for extended periods of time to study or work or maybe just have a really long vacation. This roommate was a Japanese Rastafarian. I've only seen about 3 Japanese Rastafarians, but they were all the biggest misanthropes I've ever laid eyes on. They simply hated other people with a passion. One guy freaked out when someone brushed his shoulder in a subway. In Tokyo, you get packed into the subway cars, so I have no idea how he deals with that if he can't stand a simple brush to the shoulder. Anyway, this Japanese Rastafarian happened to be my roommate, would sleep all day and party all night. That's fine by me. I don't care what you do as long as you don't bother me. Therein lies the problem, though. He would go out of his way to bother me with it. When he got back from home partying, anywhere between 4 to 6 a.m., he would open the door with the force of a hurricane, slam it closed, turn on all the lights, and stomp his feet on the wood floors all around the apartment. He did this every night. He also had a ton of incense that he would just light without asking if it was okay to do that to the apartment with his incense. I happened to kind of like the smell of incense, so I didn't mind that. But he never cleaned up the incense holder. It was just an enormous pile of light ash balanced in the windowsill. He also had a problem with opening the windows. When I moved into this place, it was the summer. Summer in Tokyo is hot and humid, even at night. So when I got home from work, I wanted to open the windows and let some air into the stuffy room. The first time, he didn't do anything until I left the room to go to the main building of the guest house, where they had a kitchen, to make dinner. While I was away, he closed all the windows and retreated to his bunk again. I guess hoping I wouldn't notice. I didn't care that he did that, but it would have been okay for him just to tell me instead of being sneaky. The second time I opened the windows after work, he was gone, so I figured it wasn't a problem. He came back and immediately closed them without saying anything to me and again retreated to his bunk to listen to reggae. The third time was when it was extra hot and I was sweating in my bed and just couldn't get to sleep, so I opened one window on my side. After about 5 minutes, he angrily comes down from his bunk, slams the window closed, and stares at me for about 5 seconds before retreating to his bunk. Okay, I guess he really hates temperatures below 90. He would also occasionally talk to himself in his bunk and laugh about something. While he was away, I peeked through the curtains around his bunk and looked inside. It was like a nest. He had tons of stuff all over his bed. I have no idea how he slept in it without all the stuff falling over the side of the bunk. All of this happened within 2 weeks. I already paid for the month and was pretty broke, but I didn't want to wake up with this psycho hanging over me, seeking revenge for an open window, so I moved out without giving a reason. The next guest house I moved into wasn't much better as far as craziness. Again, 2 Japanese roommates, both crazy. The landlord was also kinda crazy. The landlord was American, from Detroit, and he hated everything and would explode all the time at people over nothing. Back to the new Japanese roommates. One of them was apparently unemployed but wanted to be Elvis. He idolized the guy, but for all the wrong reasons. He didn't dress like him or sing like him, but he was in a rock band. So he said. He rarely left the guest house, so I don't know what band never practices and never plays. And his goal was to pass away from a heart attack from too much rock and roll. His idea of rock and roll was drinking, smoking, and eating too much until your heart explodes. He would go to McDonald's and buy literally 4 of those big bags worth of food and eat it all in one sitting. He showed it all to me once. He bought 4 burgers, 5 fries, 2 large Cokes, 2 milkshakes, and some nuggets. The thing is that he was thin as a rail and never gained any weight from this insane binge eating. The other Japanese roommate was more sane, but still, odd. He apparently would get up in the middle of the night and peek through the curtains at the other Japanese roommate while he was sleeping and just watch him sleep. I only know about this because one time the other roommate wasn't asleep and caught him doing it, and there was a crazy-off that ended with the less crazy night watcher leaving the guest house. Now I'm left with crazy Elvis. He starts to get less and less friendly. He starts complaining to the landlord about everything I do. He says I play video games loudly in my bunk at night. I have a MacBook. What games can I play loudly on this thing? I just watch movies and sometimes TV shows with earbuds in, and occasionally chuckle a little bit. That's it. This guy emails the landlord every time I have my computer in my bunk saying I'm doing something or other so loudly that he can't sleep. One time he did it when I wasn't even in my bunk, but my computer was. He saw the power cable leading to the curtains around my bunk and assumed I was on my laptop and complained again to the landlord. The landlord, being a powder keg, explodes every time at me. I tried to explain how I wasn't even in my bunk when he was making some of his accusations and invited him to come around and see exactly what I was doing. But he was also lazy and didn't want to go anywhere. It was much more convenient for him to start emailing threats to me because he's annoyed at all the emails Crazy Elvis is sending him late at night. Eventually, that circle of hostility got too intense and I moved to another unit in the guest house. Not long after I left Crazy Elvis's room, he was kicked out for reasons unknown. Still, he had annoyed the landlord to such a degree that the landlord always associated my name with anger and was never nice to me again. So I moved out and got an actual apartment and haven't lived with a roommate since. Story 13. Just so you can understand the situation a little bit better, I'll lay out how my dorm was set up. There were 4 rooms and a suite, with 2 bathrooms and a common room. There were 2 people in each room, so that's 8 people in a suite. I had a roommate in my freshman year of college who would be crazy dirty. This dude was a straight-up bro. I'm talking right out of Jersey Shore. I'm a semi-clean person, and I've never seen anyone so messy and disgusting in my life. He has energy drink cans and a few bottles in a substance-free dorm, but I didn't really care about that part, just that they were growing mold, strewn across the floor along with massive heaps of his bro clothes. That wasn't even the worst part. Whenever he was in his room, he would sing at the top of his lungs, the mainstream trash music you hear on the radio. He was a terrible singer. On top of that, this guy would come into my real roommate's room with nothing on and ask us how his chest looked after using Nair. This guy was apparently a clothes model and pretty much an all-around D-bag. His roommate was a short, chubby, Weasley-looking fellow that we all called the Weasel that proclaimed that he could hurt us, except for maybe that guy, while pointing to a big football player-built guy in a roommate meeting on move-in day. About halfway through the semester, he decided to sneak in 2 pet mice. Okay, whatever, I thought. I could handle some mice. Nah, it turns out he would just leave them. He would feed them, but he would never clean the cages or really check on them. Sometimes one would escape and run around the suite. Well, that added to the existing mess in that room. I mean, that thing reeked. Most disgusting room I had ever walked into in my life. At the end of the semester, the bro roommate got hammered and threw the mice out. Let's just say the fat chubby one was not enthused and drama ensued. Holy Jesus. If my other 5 roommates weren't upstanding, incredibly awesome people, there would be no way I would have been able to handle living there. Oh, I also forgot to mention, the chubby one lived in our common room for the first 2 months of school and created a sty out of that, as well. The rest of us had just decided to stay in our rooms and walk through it when we had to and not linger in that tainted infestation called the living area. Story 14. So here's my worst bad roommate story. I've had a few. So to start this off, I'd moved to Arizona to follow a girl. That's also a terrifying story. And I needed a roommate because the original roommate had backed out at the last minute. So I hit up Craigslist. Need a couple who have a cat, whatever. It's a 2-bedroom apartment split 3 ways. I'm down for cheaper rent. They're both employed and seem like nice enough people. First sign things were going to go terribly wrong was that they were not comfortable signing a lease with a complex, but would rather sign one with me personally so they would be technically subletting. I informed them this is against the lease I signed already for the apartment, and they said, "Oh, okay, we'll do the paperwork later." So skipping over a few minor things, like the guy getting locked out and according to the apartment manager was walking around the building, swearing up a storm on the phone and making my neighbors feel uncomfortable because he tried to climb the fence onto the balcony. So the guy quits his job for no other reason than he doesn't feel like working there anymore. Gets another one and quits in a month. They never paid rent on time. They would get into fights at 3 a.m. and scream at each other. One night, he got so heated she slapped him. And then he left and she stood at the door screaming obscenities at him in the middle of the night. I'd once made the mistake of telling them I was getting a letter from my grandmother. They intercepted it thinking they could get the money that was in there. I found the letter shortly after I kicked them out, and a friend of mine had sent me a Visa gift card that also never showed up in the mail. $10 in cash went missing from my room as well as whatever small change I had. Of course, when I changed the lock on my bedroom door, they got mad because I didn't trust them. The guy continuously smoked indoors after I told him not to because A, I hate the way it makes the apartment smell, and B, it was on the lease that we weren't allowed to smoke. It tells me, "No, dude, I don't smoke indoors," as there's evidence in the sink. After 3 months of this, I kicked him out and they tried to make me feel like the bad guy. After I kicked him out, I went to their room to clean up and it was the most disgusting thing I'd seen. The blinds had been torn up, the place smelled like cigs, The bathroom mirror was covered in grime to the point where you couldn't actually use the mirror. The bathroom itself was disgusting. Trash all over the place, the carpet stained in several places, and to top it off, one of them had punched a hole in the wall. Cleaned that room for 3 days. And oh, they never signed the lease, so all of this went on my credit record. I ended up moving back to Seattle regardless, but yeah, that was a fun mess. Story 15. I think I win this thread. I'm out of town for the weekend. I live in a big place with 4 roommates. A group of girls we hung out with wanted to have a party at our apartment that weekend. I'd been hanging out with one of the girls, Jill. Jill called me to ask if she could sleep in my bed that night. I said, of course. They have the party and go out. Jill gets a little too hammered and has a brownie. Apparently, one of my roommates, Jack, got very handsy dancing with her at the bar. Jill realizes she's very, very hammered, so goes home to my room alone to pass out. She's asleep in my bed, alone. All this info is undisputed. What happened next is very disputed. Apparently, Jack then comes home, goes upstairs to my room, and wakes up Jill in my bed. Keep in mind, she's hammered pretty much. They have intimacy. Jill is crying and upset the next day and tells other roommates she left the bar to get away from Jack. Was very blacked out and was in my room, so when someone woke her up kissing her, she thought it was me. As she realizes it wasn't, she wants to stop and he doesn't stop. Jack claims everything was consensual, although I do not know if she was even in a state to give consent. I arrive home 2 days later, immediately kick Jack out of the apartment for the support of other roommates, only don't call the cops for Jill's insistence. So in the end, at the absolute best, he hooked up with a girl I had been hooking up with in my bed. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.